Founders of the Vitebsk community. After the mayor had read out the king's decree, it was decided there and then to choose someone to be the leader of the Jewish community. There was a unanimous vote in favor of Mordechai Aaron Segal, who had so successfully negotiated on behalf of the Jews as intermediary between them and the king. This same Mordechai Aaron Segal was the ancestor of the father-in-law of the founder of Chabad, Rabbi Shner Zalman, author of the Tanya. In this same year, Nachum married the daughter of the Gaon, Rabbi Shmuel Yosef of Vilna. For 5 years, Nachum studied under the great tzaddik, Rabbi Yukatiel Zalman Krakauer, who was famed as a saint and recluse. Nachum was so greatly influenced by his saintly teacher that he too tried to emulate his example. He spent most of his time in prayer and study at the Beis HaMedrash, going home only to snatch a few hours' sleep to refresh himself. Then he would return to the Beis HaMedrash to devote himself wholeheartedly to the service of God in prayer, solitude, and Torah study. He begrudged himself the pleasure of spending time with his own family, and to no one did he speak unless it related to a discussion of the Torah. Tevel was very proud of his son Nachum, and gladly provided him and his daughter-in-law with all their needs. But Nachum's father-in-law Shmuel Yosef was very far from being pleased. His biggest concern was that his daughter was still childless after being married for many years, and according to the din, she ought to obtain a divorce from her husband. This she absolutely refused to do, as she had the greatest regard for him and was very fond of him. His daughter-in-law's childlessness grieved Tevel too, and he gave still more charity than ever, hoping he would thus earn the privilege of becoming a grandfather. Tevel's charitableness became a positive byword, and he made no distinction, distributing his money among the needy Jew and non-Jew alike. When Tevel heard of the famine in the district of Livland, he sent his agent to buy large stocks of grain for distribution among all the hungry, irrespective of race or creed. For the Torah tells us that especially in time of hunger, help must be given to all who need it. One might have thought that Tevel would be justified in feeling superior for all his good deeds and all the adulation he earned thereby, but he was, on the contrary, exceedingly humble and modest. If ever he gave personal thought to his manifold acts of charity, it was in grateful thanks to the Almighty for putting him in such a privileged position where he could help those less fortunate than himself. It was Tevel's modesty, therefore, that endeared him to everyone. He had the greatest respect and admiration for Torah students and scholars since his early youth, and the respect and admiration had increased with time. Yet he was to be found equally among the very ordinary working people attending their simchas, be it bris milah, bar mitzvah, or betrothal. The people just adored him for it. He brought grace and honor to every simcha that he came to. When Tevel was 90 years of age, he felt it was time that he put his affairs in the hands of a younger person. He chose one by the name of Tzaddik Moshe. A few years later, Tzaddik Moshe asked Tevel to allow him to engage his sister's grandson, Zalman Aaron, as accounts manager. This he agreed to, and Tevel's affairs were ably handled by these two men. When the Jewish community was first established in Vitebsk, a tax was imposed upon each member. Tevel naturally came forward with a handsome donation towards the city's needs. For the first time in the history of Vitebsk, yeshivas and charitable institutions were established. When, in 1934, permission was granted to the Jews to buy land in Vitebsk and build houses on it, Tevel bought several plots of land in various parts of the town and gave them as a present to the Jewish community. Tevel's generosity helped greatly toward the progress of the community, enabling the building committee to carry out its plan of activity. With the expansion of the community, Jews began to build houses and synagogues on the various streets of Vitebsk, and with each Beis HaMedrash, there was always a cheder adjoining for young children. Nevertheless, Vitebsk was still, in the main, a city of merchants and workpeople. The number of Torah students was very small. Tevel lived to the age of 97, and though one would say he had reached a very ripe old age, everyone regretted his passing. He was so universally loved that all the town, from the civic and government heads to the humblest and lowest, all came to offer their last respects to this great Jewish philanthropist. His funeral was attended by many whose tears flowed freely. Tevel died in the year 1641. According to his will, a quarter of his possessions was to be distributed to charity. This was to be allocated by the leaders of the community. The remainder of his money and property was to go to his only son Nachum. Tzaddik Moshe and Zalman Aaron were to manage the affairs as before. Vitebsk was composed of two parts. One was called the large side, and the other the small side. The large side was the business center, so it was natural that, with the appreciable legacy left to the community by Tevel, they should choose the small side on which to build the yeshiva. Nachum did not allow his newly found wealth to change his mode of life in the slightest degree. He was the same quiet Torah student and recluse, speaking to no one and spending all his time at the Beis HaMedrash. It was now 24 years after his marriage, and his wife was still barren. She was already 38 years old, for in those days girls were married at a very tender age. She was only 14 years old at her marriage. Her father, Shmuel Yosef, who had repeatedly urged her without success to agree to a divorce, now finally appealed to her husband Nachum, telling him that he must persuade her to follow the din. Nachum was most reluctant to take this step, for he knew how devoted his wife was to him always, and he appreciated it very much. Still, however distasteful it was to him or his wife, he agreed that they must conform to the din. And so he called 3 wise and learned men and asked them how we could carry out the matter in the fairest possible manner. The decision arrived at was that Nachum should settle upon his wife 600 gulden for each year they were married. That meant a sum of about 15,000 gulden would be given to his wife with the divorce, so that she would be financially well provided for. Nachum wanted her to know that he was sending her away because of the necessity of carrying out the din and for no other reason, and so he gave her an additional gift of several thousand gulden. Meanwhile, Tzaddik Moshe and Zalman Aaron were managing Nachum's business with great success. They had expanded it with the introduction of flax and wool and had put this branch of the business in the care of the well-known expert in these lines, Meir Shlema of Vilna. In the course of 3 years, they found that their profits were mounting higher and higher, and Nachum was in fact becoming a very rich man. Tzaddik Moshe proved himself a most successful businessman, yet he envied anyone who could devote his time to Torah study.